I want to be very clear, this video is not aimed at beginner Phasmophobia players. If you are new, please check the top video I have linked in the description below, as I think that video will give you more of the information that you are looking for, and then come back and revisit this video when you start getting more experience. If you have started dabbling in Nightmare or higher difficulty, however, then this video is aimed at you. I'm going to walk you through my process of how I approach playing the game with no evidence or sanity. Even if you never intend to delve past Nightmare or Insanity mode, this video will have information that should be helpful to you. I've also added chapters for all of it. There's a ton of information in this video, and it might be a little overwhelming. Try to take maybe a couple of things from the video, practice it, and you can always come back and then try to absorb something else. So I started with settings that Magster uses, and if you're not familiar with her, do yourself a favor and give her channel a follow. She is absolutely insane at the game, and it was through watching her that I started wanting to play at this difficulty. I'm not going to spend too much time on these settings. Feel free to pause and take screenshots if you need them. The only thing that I will mention is that if this is something you want to ease your way into, then by all means go into this and change a few things. And one thing that I will mention, if you choose to do a lot of outdoor maps, leaving the weather set to windy can be a little problematic, as it might affect how well you can actually hear the ghost. You may want to consider flipping that to something else. Okay, so I'm going to talk briefly about the loadout and the equipment that I like to bring in when I play on this difficulty. So, pre-Ascension update, I never took these head cams. I never did. However, the Tier 2 actually has a headlamp built into it, which is pretty nice to have. So I take them now. I will not take them at Tier 1, but Tier 2, Tier 3, yes. Yes, I will. Let's continue moving left to right, okay? So, 4 lighters, 4 candles. I will definitely take 2 motion sensors, a couple of parabolic mics, the smudges. Let's just say you always need, well, they're not called smudges anymore. They're called incense. Always bring 4 incenses on this difficulty. 3 salts, 2 crucifixes. EMF readers can be very situational. Often I will not touch them at all. If you really wanted to save cost, then I'd say maybe you could leave this one out. But there are a couple of ghosts that even in this difficulty, getting EMF readings can be useful, and I'll get into that later. Spirit box, don't need it. Ghost book, don't need it. Cameras, do you like making extra money? I tend to forget. Luckily, I play with teammates who tend to be a little bit more on the ball with that sort of thing. So, I mean, hey, bring a camera, take some pictures, make a few extra dollars. Hard to argue with that, right? Thermometers, very useful for locating the ghost room. No, it won't give you freezing temperatures, but it is nice to get that extra little confirmation when you need it. UV lights aren't going to ever give you evidence, but the one thing that I will say is that if you decide to play on larger maps, if you're navigating through some dark corridors, then the ability to just turn it on and just leave it there and have it be another light source can be useful. DOTS projectors, kind of the same thing as the UV. They're not really useful for anything other than using it as markers or additional light sources. Really, do you need to bring them in? No, you don't. But they're not exactly terrible to have. Again, especially on a larger map. Flashlights, especially with this new update and how dark they've made everything, it is very difficult to navigate without a flashlight. And there is something that I will show you that I like to do in particular with these flashlights later. Cameras, if you want to check for a mimic, you're going to need a camera. And tripods certainly help. Okay, so in Phasmophobia, we're going to talk a lot about generalities. I'm going to do my best to point out where exceptions exist, but you're going to hear a lot of phrases like tends to, or will usually, or probably won't. You done, kitty? Remember that those phrases are not absolute. Part of getting better at this difficulty is getting enough experience under your belt so that you can make sound judgments about those sometimes statements. Okay, so for demonstration purposes, I have turned Friendly Ghost on, which means the ghost cannot hunt us. But I'm going to try to walk you through the first in what I think you're going to need to really concentrate on and really learn in order to survive with no evidence and no sanity. And the first is going to be survival. If you're used to playing the game at the usual Phasmophobia difficulties, then you're used to playing with sanity. Without any sanity, this ghost is always angry, and it is able to hunt you from the moment you walk through the door, and sometimes it will. You need to know where you're going to go depending on where the ghost chooses to hunt from. If you're confused about what makes a good hiding spot versus what makes a not so good hiding spot, And by the way, just a reminder, you are never really 100% safe in any hiding spots. But yes, there are some that are better than others. I reviewed a lot of what makes a good hiding spot versus not a good hiding spot in the other video that I mentioned before. And again, that is linked in the description below. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started here. So right when you walk in, it's very good to go ahead and just check to see what you have available, to see if anything's blocked. By the way, sound is very useful. If you're playing the game through speakers, I might suggest putting on a headset instead. Often, you need to tell where the ghost is hunting from through sound. You will often hear it before you see it. I mean, maybe you have an amazing speaker setup and you can tell left and right through speakers just as easily as with a headset. Me personally, I find it is far easier to use headphones than it is through speakers. With the grace period set to 2, you have 2 seconds to react to the hunt starting. One final note about sound, by the way, I really do not recommend having a hot microphone. I really recommend turning on push to talk. It's just a whole lot safer. If you have it set to always on, then if you breathe too hard, if someone happens to open a door to your office, studio, living room, wherever it is you're sitting, and the mic picks that up, and you're in a hiding spot and the ghost is in the middle of the hunt, you may end up getting killed through no fault of your own other than your mic was hot. One thing that I will mention, and maybe this won't be a problem for you, but use extra care around stairs. The sound in Phasmo is usually good enough that I can usually tell where a ghost is starting a hunt from. The one exception to this tends to be if I'm in the middle of a stairwell. I often have trouble determining if it's happening above me or below me, so just be advised and use a little extra care around stairwells. Also, with the last update, since the game has gotten so dark, again, I already mentioned the tier 2 headlamps. Those are super nice to have, and if you don't have them unlocked, I'm busy. Oh my god. Okay, I didn't need those lights anyway, thanks. So, I got completely distracted. What was I talking about? Often what I will do with the regular flashlights is I will leave them in rooms pointed at safe hiding spots. That way, if the ghost decides that it wants to kill the breaker on me and then hunt immediately after, I can... Okay, I thought I had the ghost set to friendly. Apparently I don't. Well, in some ways that was pretty fortuitous. It kind of made the point for me. The ghost hunted. I still had the light on. I could see my path clearly to the hiding spot, and I survived the hunt of whatever in the world ghost that was that just decided to rudely interrupt me trying to give a demonstration. Let me emphasize something about smudge sticks while I'm thinking about it. When you're first starting in this difficulty, I really recommend keeping, well, I'm sorry, incense. I really recommend keeping an incense on you unless you know for a fact that the ghost is not about to hunt. Incense, when used properly, is your only real panic button in the game. They're also a key factor in getting a lot of different information, so don't burn them needlessly if you can avoid it. But again, look, if you get caught out, it happens to me, it happens to a lot of people. If you need to use it, burn it. And just as a reminder, most ghosts can sense you talking or holding powered on electronic equipment, even if you're hiding. The Yokai, not as much, but we'll get into that later. Also remember that you need to break line of sight before you get into a hiding spot. If the ghost sees you enter a closet, it will pull you out. Looping. Part of identifying ghosts in this difficulty means you're most likely going to have to put eyes on it at some point. This will require some practice, and if you're anything like me, it will also require a few deaths. This took me a while to learn, but and look, to be clear, I feel like this is something I still have room to improve on. I still screw this up every now and again. One way to practice this is to go into settings, change your sprint to infinite, and let the ghost chase you. Experiment with how little you can press that sprint button and still stay ahead of the ghost. Another piece of advice is to try to save at least a little bit of sprint for when you have to make your dash to your hiding spot. If you can time your exit to coincide with your sprint being available, you're in good shape. Also keep in mind that if you somehow run out of sprint, sometimes you might be better off crouched in your looping spot and letting the ghost wander, particularly if it gets in front of you somehow. And one more detail I'll share, often in looping spots like the kitchen counter in Tanglewood, if you get caught without a smudge during a hunt, if you stay crouched while looping, the ghosts that would normally increase speed with line of sight will not do so because they can't actually see you. This will give you a little more room for error with your sprint. While learning this difficulty, I highly recommend sticking to the smaller maps. Bigger maps introduce more challenges, and quite frankly, I'm still learning them. So keeping the maps to generally the top row, that's these, will help your learning experience to be at least a little bit smoother, in my opinion. Learn the difficulty on the smaller maps, learn the larger maps after you learn this difficulty. Get acclimated to navigating in the dark. Walls and looking at the floor can be your friend here. Now, with the new Ascension update, this has definitely been made more difficult, and I'm still adjusting. Just understand that if you want to hold a smudge stick and a lighter in your hand, that means you're going to have to drop the flashlight in order to carry in another piece of equipment. The Tier 2 headlamp can help out a lot with this, and as I mentioned earlier, dropping turned on flashlights or UV lights or placing DOTS projectors around hiding spots or hallways can be a bit of a help, especially if the ghost decides to kill the breaker and then hunt immediately after. Let's talk about time management. This is probably the area where I think I personally still have the most room to improve out of everything that I've mentioned so far, particularly if the ghost ends up in a part of the house where I have to go a long way to get equipment out of the van. Ideally, you want to spend the time in between hunts actively going to get things to set up for your next test. Sometimes, yes, you may get a new bit of data thrown at you, and that might warrant collecting your thoughts for a little bit, but thinking ahead and knowing what test you want to do next is indeed a skill. We're training our brains to get into the if this, then that, so we spend our time more efficiently. As mentioned earlier, incense is a limited resource that is critical to figuring out a lot of the ghosts that require a lot of testing, so we don't want to waste the time they give us if we don't have to. Let's talk about death for a minute. Understand that death and failure are part of the learning process. There's only so much that I or any content creator can try to explain to you verbally. Actually doing it yourself is an entirely different matter that will take practice. Practice means occasionally losing. I still miss some of the things that I'm going to tell you to watch out for in this video. I am not perfect. I'm still learning, but I've come a long way, and I think I can help you get up that learning curve just a little bit faster. Okay, so first things first, don't panic when you look at this thing, okay? This document is very big, and I will make it available for you to download if you want to, so you can play around with it, edit it. Are you done, Kitty? She's done with me. You can edit it, adjust it to your playstyle, add the notes that you want to add to it, or if you just want to use it as a starting point to make your own little version of Clip Notes, that's totally fine. That link will be down below in the description. I want you to keep in mind as we go through this that the structure that I am laying out here is not intended to be rigid. This is merely framework to get you going, and once you get enough experience under your belt, you will absolutely find yourself drifting off course because something grabbed your attention, or you might find other ways of doing these tests that suit you better. And don't worry, I will have plenty of gameplay footage. It's not just going to be me talking over this massive chart. My usual goal now when I first enter the house is I try to get the breaker on and get set up to loop the ghost before the first hunt. There are many times where the ghost will hunt either immediately or very quickly, and sometimes those plans will get delayed. I typically grab any car key if it's in the tray. I also like to check for hiding as I make my way to the breaker. With my settings, hiding's usually pretty abundant, but occasionally a spot might get blocked, and that's something that I want to know beforehand. All that being said, I'm going to try to guide a different workflow more akin to when I first started learning this difficulty. I employed a slightly different approach that some of you might find helpful, as it's less information to try to take in at once. Instead of going straight for a loop, I used to just hide in a closet with a smudge stick just to listen to the ghost hunt one time. If you're looking to start dipping your toes into the water and not jumping in head first with this difficulty, this might be a decent approach for you to start. If you're brand new to this difficulty and nervous, start here. Eventually, work your way to starting with the loop. If you're feeling brave and confident in your looping, then the first step that I'm about to lay out is going to be combined with the next one. Okay, let's get started. The first question we're going to ask is, does this ghost get really slow? Knowing what normal speed is will be your first baseline knowledge test. If it helps, try to think of a song with at least roughly the same tempo. I'll spare you my singing for now, but the song that I like to use is Staying Alive by the Bee Gees. I can hear you judging me. There is one ghost in particular that you need to be extra vigilant for here, and that is the Deogen. The Deogen is the only ghost in Phasmophobia that you cannot hide from, but you can loop it extremely easily without ever tapping sprint, as you can see behind me. So if you're in a hiding spot while the ghost is hunting for the first time, if you hear the ghost sound super fast far away, and then it gets close to where you're hiding and it suddenly gets super slow, you may want to consider getting out of the hiding spot and getting to a looping area as quickly as you can, because the Deogen might be about to kill you in your hiding spot. Since we've talked about the Deogen, let's talk about a ghost I consider to be kind of its opposite. The Revenant, when it does not have a target, is one of the slowest ghosts in the game. So if you successfully make it to your hiding spot and the steps you hear are super slow, that's your first indication that it might be a Revenant. If a Revenant acquires a target, however, it will become one of the fastest. So if you're unsure, let the ghost get line of sight on you. If it gets very fast, but then slows down when you smudge it, it's a Revenant. And remember, the higher tiered incense and the better salt will also cause a decrease in speed as well. So don't confuse one for the other. Okay, so we talked about the slow ghosts. Now I'm going to talk about the fast ghosts. The faster ghosts, for me anyway, tend to be a little bit easier to identify, but when you first start, they're also probably the ones that are more likely to be dangerous. So again, pay a lot of attention to where you have available hiding and really focus on managing your sprint when it's time to get away. So the hunt starts and you hear the ghost moving quickly. The first thing that you need to listen or watch for is this ghost fast everywhere? Or does it sound like it's getting fast in some places and slow in other places? Once we get that answer, we can further narrow down what it can be. So let's follow the chart. Does the ghost get really fast? Yes. Does it sound fast everywhere? No, just sometimes. You're looking at either a Raiju or a Hantu. So the Raiju gets faster around electronic equipment. If you think that the ghost might be a Raiju, you can try turning on and off your flashlight while looping the ghost to see if the ghost speeds up while your flashlight is on. If you are a little shaky on your looping, then maybe this isn't the best choice for you. So if you are new, what I would recommend would be this. Pick a hiding spot somewhere near the ghost room. Drop turned on flashlights on the floor near the ghost room. Make sure that the breaker is on. This helps cancel out Hantu, and I'll expand on that in a moment. But just know that if your breaker is off, you are skewing the results of this test. Let it hunt. See if it only speeds up near the areas that you drop the flashlights. If it does, then do the reverse test. Take all the flashlights either out of the house or just turn them off. Let it hunt again, and then see if it's normal speed through that same zone. Open. Show me them ghosted grapes. That's normal speed. It sped up. It sped up. Raiju or Hantu? Any electronics in here?
Understood.
Okay, here we go. Hello from the other side. I told you not to kill me 1,000 times. I kind of screwed up my loop there. I'm gonna grab another smudge. We're gonna throw a lot of electronics on that top floor, and if it's suddenly zoomy boy everywhere, Raiju. Now let's see if it's super zoomy when it gets up here. Yeah, look how much faster it is. Raiju. If you think the ghost might be a Hantu, you can, but I don't recommend this at first. Try to test for it by shutting the breaker off, looping it, and then watching for its Hantu breath. Hantus will have freezing breath in a cold house. That being said, this can be a dangerous test to do, and I don't recommend it if you're new to this difficulty. It's a Hantu. Is it? Why can't I see its breath? The The way that I test for it instead is by utilizing the breaker. If you turn the breaker off and the ghost sounds like it's getting fast in pockets all over the house, but then you turn the breaker on and it sounds like it's only fast inside the ghost room, it's a Hantu. And just a reminder, it can take some time, maybe 1 or 2 hunts, for the house temperature to adjust to the breaker being on or off. This a Raiju? I think it's a Raiju. Or a Hantu.
It's not a Thaye. That thing sped up.
Well, like I said, we just turned the breakers now off, so let's see what it does now. The audio got weird around the stairs, but that sounded pretty consistently slow. That was a Hantu. It should start to speed up. Maybe the house didn't cool down enough yet. Hantu. Hantu. So if you observe the ghost being fast everywhere in the house, we're narrowing down our list of ghosts to 2. You're looking at either a Thaye or a Moroi, and I'm going to talk about these 2 ghosts together because often if you're testing for one, it's usually against the other. We're going to start off again with a method that I think you should know about, but I don't recommend you start with. A fast way of figuring out Thaye versus Moroi is to loop it. If you only get 1 or 2 loops in, understand that this test might be a little inconclusive. If the already fast ghost sounds like it's continuing to get faster the longer it chases you, then it's a Moroi. If it sounds like the ghost speed is not wavering at all and stays at a constant tempo, it's a Thaye. Yeah. Ghost, come here. If you aren't confident in your looping skills just yet, or if you just really want to make sure, here is another way that I do recommend to test for Moroi versus Thaye. Locate the ghost's favorite room, put down crucifixes, stay in the ghost room as long as you can. As the game continues, if the ghost starts to hunt less often and starts to slow its speed during hunts, then you have a Thaye. If you spend a lot of time in the ghost room and you observe no changes at all in the ghost speed, then it's a Moroi. Also remember that the ghost always has a chance to change rooms, so I'd recommend keeping a thermometer in the room with you so you can periodically check to make sure the ghost's room did not change. Since we have smudge sticks, I'm going to try to age it to confirm it, but I'm pretty sure it's a Thaye. So what I'm doing is, I have a crucifix, and I'm sitting in what I believe to be the ghost room. If I am correct, and this is the ghost room, which it may not be, but if it is the ghost room, and it is a Thaye, listen to it, and you will actually hear the next time it hunts, it will start to sound audibly slower. It's already slower. You hear it? It's still fast. It's still fast, but it's not as fast as it was at the start of the match. So I'm pretty confident this is the ghost room. Another sign. It's almost normal speed now. Y'all hear it? It's a thing. There is one more, let's call it altered speed ghost. Ghosts? The twins. The twins have a couple of tells. First off is one will be slightly slower than normal speed. The other will be slightly faster than normal. Keep in mind, by the way, that the two ghosts don't necessarily alternate. Sometimes you'll get one of them for a few hunts in a row before the other one decides to show up. When my ears are good and I've been playing a lot, it's usually pretty quick that I'll pick up on twin speed, but the difference is so subtle it can be a little rough to detect if you haven't had one in a while. Another way to detect twins is if you hear the ghost doing two things at the same time in two different rooms. Just know that this can be a little tricky in groups. Twins can also sometimes seem like they're teleporting, as they might originate a hunt from their ghost room, or they might originate a hunt from their last interaction. But their biggest tell is the ghost changing speeds between hunts. And Supermaster Pig, you got a little bit of guilt in that. A little bit. A little bit. Ghost, come here. Ghost, come here. Okay, so for this next section, let's focus on ghosts that you can potentially identify in just one hunt that are normal speed. And by the way, don't feel bad if you're having trouble watching for all of these things in one hunt, especially when you're first starting. This can definitely be a lot to take in. Before we get into it, though, I want to emphasize a word that I used earlier, potentially one hunt. Just because you don't observe a ghost behavior on the first hunt might just mean that the right set of circumstances wasn't present, or maybe something was missed. Also, keep in mind, even when I think I'm sure of a ghost activity, I usually prefer to let it hunt one more time just to confirm that I did indeed see or hear what I thought I saw or heard. Let's talk about blink rates for a second. During a hunt, every ghost has a normal blink rate of doing just that, flipping back and forth between being visible and invisible, except two of them. Only way to get accustomed to what normal is, you're gonna have to observe enough ghosts to where you have a baseline for what is a normal blink rate. There are two ghosts that have different blink rates. That's the Phantom and the Oni. Let me first show you what a normal blink rate looks like. The Phantom will be less visible than it is visible. It's a Phantom. The Oni will be much more visible than it is invisible. All right, come on. Oh my God. Are you an Oni? That's a pretty visible ghost, isn't it? There's not a whole lot of coaching that I can give as to what normal versus abnormal blink rate is. Being able to visually identify is something that is going to come with practice and time. There are a couple of details I will share about these two ghosts if you're having trouble identifying them or if you're on the fence. Onis will not give the mist ball event. The little gray ball that just kind of travels throughout the house and goes... Okay, so that's not the best ghost impression. Sorry. Hey, Nick, why don't you just show some footage of it? I need it to come here. Mist ball event, not an Oni. So if you thought an Oni was in play and that mist ball comes around, you can safely cross off that one. Onis also tend to give more ghost events than usual. So if you have a ghost that's just eventing like crazy, maybe take another look at that blink rate and check for Oni again. But I can't emphasize enough. Don't take this ghost as eventing a lot. It must be an Oni. If it's eventing a lot, use it as a cue that maybe you want to check for Oni. Don't take it as like, oh, it's definitely an Oni. Phantoms will sometimes be a little teleporty. I wouldn't rely on that too heavily, though. And by teleporty, by the way, I mean they'll initiate hunts closer to players when they aren't close to the ghost room. Don't confuse this, by the way, with a ghost that events near you and then immediately starts a hunt. That's not the same behavior. Phantoms will also not appear in a photo, so if you take a picture of them, you won't see the ghost in the photo. I will warn you, if you play with teammates, I have seen the photos in this game do some strange things where what's in the photo for one player is different from the other, so for that reason, I would say don't count on that. But if you snap a photo of the ghost and the ghost isn't in it, consider looping and checking for that phantom blink rate again. Worth mentioning, by the way, I don't know if they intend to change this one day, but you can actually see both of these different blink rates even when you're dead. Okay, so while we're talking about visual ghosts that you can identify in one hunt, let's talk about the Obake. The Obake is the shape-shifting ghost. While it has the normal blink rate, it has a 6.66% chance, what a coincidence, to blink to a different ghost form during its hunts. Sometimes the change is really subtle and hard to notice, but sometimes it can be pretty pronounced and easy to see. Since the percentage chance is as low as it is, keep in mind that if you're not looping for long periods of time, I wouldn't be very quick to cross this one off. If you're lucky, you might get it to shapeshift twice or even more in one hunt. But if it's taking a long time to get to you, and then you're not seeing it for very long, you may not see the shift happen. And also keep in mind, if the ghost were to change stances, for example, like it's crawling in one hunt, and then it's standing in the next hunt, that is not the Obake ability. It has to change forms within one single hunt. And by the way, if you are dead, you will not see the Obake shapeshift. Only a player that's alive can see it. Poltergeist. The Polty might be my favorite. Poltergeist is the throwing ghost. So I think most experienced players are aware of the Polty explosion ability, where it has the possibility to take a pile of items and throw them around all at once like confetti. The problem for me is that relying on this might take a really long time. Luckily, there is another way which you can test for this ghost by looping. Gather a pile of items on top of whatever your looping point is. Next, you're going to loop and observe the ghost and its throwing during the hunt. Other ghosts will throw things during the hunt. Other ghosts can do what I've heard referred to as super throws, but no other ghost can yeet things as constantly and as consistently as a poltergeist can. The best way that I can think to describe it is picture a really excited 5-year-old kid wanting to get to the bottom of their toy chest as quickly as possible. That's a poltergeist. So Mylings are known as the quiet ghosts, which is weird because they tend to give more parabolic microphone responses. A good indication that you might be dealing with a Myling is that if you hear things being thrown during a hunt, but you hear no footsteps, that's a good sign you have a Myling. The best way to test for a Myling is to bring a flashlight into a closet. With it still on, throw it at your feet. Let the ghost hunt. If you only hear footsteps while the flashlight is glitching out, it's a Myling. Do not confuse this for a Raiju, by the way. The Raiju can interfere with electronic equipment at a larger range. Remember, Myling is a normal speed ghost. Raiju will get faster around electronic equipment. Quick warning, do not confuse audio between floors for quiet ghosts. I have absolutely been fooled more than once by a ghost going down basement stairs or attic stairs, whatever, thinking it was a Myling being quiet. If you can, try to choose a testing location that removes elevation from the equation. Man, I don't know. I still think Myling. I think this is a Myling. Like, I hear things being thrown, but I don't hear steps. It's a Myling. Okay, let's talk about a ghost whose ability still slips past me now and then, the Jinn. The Jinn will never touch the breaker. So if you're in a match that's been going on for a while and the breaker stayed on the whole time, this is a test you might want to consider running. I keep it in the one hunt category because it does have an ability that can potentially be spotted on the very first hunt. The Jinn is what I like to refer to as the excited puppy of the ghosts. In order to test for the Jinn ability, first of all, the breaker must be on. This ability will not happen if the breaker is off. With the breaker on, position yourself so that the ghost has to walk towards you from a decent distance away. While the breaker is on, when the Jinn first makes eye contact with you, it will get a short burst of speed to close the distance. It's kind of like an excited puppy that's really excited to see you come home, except it wants to murder you. Then it will reset back to normal speed. This ability is very subtle and very easy to miss. I still miss this from time to time. This is an ability I often find easier to hear rather than see, by the way. And yes, keep in mind that the Jinn will then slowly increase speed with line of sight after it resets to normal, like a lot of other ghosts will. If it spawns too close to you, you might miss it. Also, remember, if you're unsure, you can do a reverse Jinn test. Just stand in the same spot you did during the regular Jinn test and then shut the breaker off and then use the ghost behavior for a comparison. Come here. It's a Jinn! It's a Jinn! It's a Jinn! That's a Jinn ability! Here we go. You heard it? You heard it? It was only a couple of steps. It was only a couple of steps. It wasn't much. The Mimic can imitate any ghost in the game. The Mimic can change what ghost it's imitating between hunts. The Mimic might be a demon one hunt and then a Deogen the next. The biggest indication that you might be dealing with a Mimic is if the ghost's behavior is erratic. If you think it's one ghost, but then suddenly it starts acting differently. For example, let's say it's hunted 3 times and it was always normal speed, but suddenly it's zooming everywhere. Or it was a normal blink rate the first 2 times you looped it, but then suddenly it's barely visible like a phantom. You have a Mimic. This, by the way, is why if I guess what a ghost is on the first hunt, I often like to let it hunt one more time just to give me that little extra assurance it's not a Mimic. That being said, understand that the Mimic can imitate the same ghost back-to-back hunts, so that's not totally reliable. The Mimic is the only ghost that will give you visible evidence, by the way, and that's why I chose to include it. I can talk, I swear. In the one hunt section, it will give ghost orbs. So if you suspect Mimic is in play and you want to be thorough, then take a video camera to the ghost room and look for the telltale ghost orbs. Okay, so there were 2 ghosts that I was tempted to include in the one hunt section, but I decided to give them their own section, the smudge ghosts. I'm not saying you absolutely have to have a timer for this game mode, but I will say unless you have an uncanny sense of how fast time is passing, you're gonna find it way more difficult without a timer. I like to use the timer on my phone. If you don't like to use things outside of the game, the parabolic microphone, the tier 2 and the tier 3, actually has a timer built into it. Just keep in mind that holding a turned on paramic in a hiding spot is an invitation for the ghost to find you. When you smudge the ghosts, most ghosts will be unable to hunt again for 90 seconds once the smudge, or incense as they're calling it now, is finished burning. There are 2 exceptions to this, the demon and the spirit. The demon will be eligible to hunt again after 60 seconds. The spirit has to wait a full 3 minutes. It is a good habit to always set a timer when your smudge finishes burning or incense finishes burning, and then recording when the next hunt begins. A couple of notes for you when doing these tests. 1, I have had demons fool me more than once by waiting 90 seconds to hunt. A demon can choose to hunt after 1 minute. Sometimes they're jerks and they choose not to. Also, and I feel like this is more common in groups, I have absolutely seen people mistake a shade for a spirit, and I'll talk more about shade later. But for now, just understand that if you have someone staying inside the ghost room What you think might be a spirit that's just taking a while after a smudge burn might just be a shade being shy because someone's in the room with it. Another thing I will mention also about the demon and spirit is that usually if I'm testing for either of them, unless I feel really strongly that it's one or the other, I'll be using the times in between smudges to set up tests for other ghosts. Okay, so now let's call this the cross-off section. These tests will often feel like you're testing for what it isn't rather than what it is, and I hope that makes sense. You're crossing ghosts off your list as you go. Let's start with the Onryo. If I'm not getting any strong vibes about any of the ghosts that I haven't tested for yet, this is usually the first test that I will reach for. Another advantage in doing this test is that it requires you to spend a lot of time inside the house, and during that time you might start picking up on tells on what it might actually be, potentially guiding to what you might want to test for next. The first step is to confirm the ghost's favorite room. The breaker being on and using a thermometer should help that out. Once you find it, bring the crucifixes to cover the room. If it's a small room that can be easily covered with a single crucifix, I might recommend putting the second crucifix closer to where you're going to observe the test being done from outside the room. This is important, by the way, to make sure you don't skew a shade test. Again, I will talk about that later. This just gives you a little more room for error if the ghost tends to walk out of the room and try to hunt you from there. I've had more than one Onryo be a little wandery. Once you get the crucifixes in place, get the candles and place it directly on top of the crucifixes. Onryos do not like flames. From outside the ghost's room, if you can, and look, some of the larger rooms, this gets a little problematic, but observe the candles and the crucifixes. If you see the crucifix burn while the candle is still lit, you can cross off Onryo. If you set this test up and the ghost starts blowing out candles but not burning the crucifixes, if it only initiates hunts away from its ghost room, from its favorite room, if it keeps blowing out the lighter in your hand, that's a real good indication you're dealing with an Onryo. And by the way, if for some reason you have only one candle but two crucifixes, standing over one crucifix with your lighter or match lit in your hand does work as a substitute. Couple things to keep in mind here as well. Make sure the ghost doesn't change favorite rooms. Make sure you have an exit plan if the ghost wanders out and then hunts from behind you. If you have to do the test from inside the room, keep in mind that you are now also doing a shade test. And once again, I sound like a broken record, but I will talk about that later. It can be pretty easy to confuse a shade for an Onryo at this difficulty if you are doing the test from inside the room itself. Okay, so another good thing to do at this point might be to put down some salt if you haven't done it already. Let's talk about the Wraith. Wraiths will never step in salt. The nice part about this test is that you can put it down in the ghost's room or where you want to loop the ghost and just move on to your next test. Let's talk a minute about teleporting ghosts. Do not confuse a ghost eventing on top of you and then shortly after initiating a hunt for a teleport. When I say a ghost is acting teleporty, I mean that they seem to be frequently hunting away from their favorite room. If you observe this behavior often, your mind should go to either Wraith or Banshee. If you're in a group and you're trying to figure out if a ghost is Banshee or a Wraith, well, I already mentioned the salt. If you see a ghost walk through salt at all, it is not a Wraith. So if you're between Wraith, Banshee with no salt steps, go Wraith. If you want to confirm a Banshee, you can try to use the parabolic microphone to get the unique Banshee scream. Got it! I got it! I got it! This can be a little time consuming to get, be warned, although I seem to be having a little bit more success with it lately, so maybe that's something they patched. I've had some nights where I spent multiple hunts just trying for the Banshee scream and never got it. If a ghost is being very teleporty and it's walked through salt, then I'm very inclined to roll with Banshee, particularly if I've already ruled out the rest of the book. If you are in a group, there is another way that you might be able to tell if it is a Banshee. Banshees will pick one player, and only target that one person as long as that one person remains in the house. If the preferred target leaves the house, however, just know that the Banshee will hunt like any other normal speed ghost. If someone in the group has had an incident where they were sure they were going to die and the ghost either passed through them during a hunt or the ghost just completely ignored them when it shouldn't have, that's a good indication that it is indeed a Banshee and they're not its target. If they're feeling brave, you can test this by having it hunt again and seeing if it just ignores the non-targeted player or players altogether. Remember that if you're going to do this test and you don't know who the Banshee's target is, you need all the players in the house when the hunt starts. Also worth noting, the Banshee is more likely to give you singing ghost events. This doesn't mean that other ghosts can't give them or can't give a lot of them, but just understand that if you feel like you have a ghost that's being very teleporty and it's also singing a lot and it walked through salt, that's a pretty good indication you're dealing with a Banshee. Let's talk about the Shade next. There's a number of things that might tip you off that you're dealing with a Shade. The most important thing to note here is that the Shade will not initiate a hunt from the same room a player is in. A real good way to bully a Shade, by the way, is to go hang out in its ghost room, and if the ghost suddenly decides to get super passive, especially at this difficulty, you're dealing with a Shade. So the opposite of this is if the ghost tries to initiate a hunt from the same room as a player, you can safely cross off Shade. If you're testing for a Shade by standing in its room, by the way, and it had to wander out of its room to initiate a hunt, that's also another good indication that you might be dealing with a Shade. So be warned, when testing for a Shade, you're going to want options if it does just that. The Yokai is the only ghost that cannot detect if you have electronic equipment turned on or if you're talking with the in-game voice chat unless it's really close to you. The way you test for a Yokai is that you choose a room, close the door, and either hold a flashlight in your hand or what I like to do is hold down the global talk button. Once the global talk radio, right? Once it begins to static out, you are in range for all other ghosts to detect you. From the edge of that distance, the Yokai will not. Be warned, the trouble with this test is that the Yokai might just choose to wander your direction anyway, potentially skewing the test results. If you have smudges to burn and you suspect you might be dealing with a Yokai, this is really a test I recommend running more than once. But if you know you're on the same floor as the ghost and you hear that radio static and then the radio stops staticking, and the ghost wanders off somewhere else when it could have easily come straight to you, you know it's a Yokai. Ghost, come here, come here, come here, come here, come here, come here. Ghost, come here, ghost. Ghost, hello? Ghost, okay, Ghost, come here. Ghost. This might be a Yokai. My radio staticked out for a pretty good bit. He never came back here. So now we are left with what I consider to be the ghosts that usually require the most effort to test for with this difficulty. The Unholy Trinity of 00. I actually have a much more colorful name for them, but I'm not cursing in this video. Chances are, if you're going multiple hunts and still not sure, there's a good chance it's one of the next 3. I talk about all 3 of these together because at this point you've probably gone through multiple hunts, so hopefully you have something that is at least pointing you in a direction to one of these 3 and you don't necessarily have to go down the line. But for the sake of this video and trying to keep the concept of flow going, I'm going to talk about them one at a time. Okay, so of these 3, let's talk about the Yurei first. The Yurei is known as the door ghost, and this is probably the one that's fooled me the most at this difficulty, especially when I was first starting. All ghosts can and will play with doors. The Yurei just does it the most. I'll start by talking about the Yurei ability. In my experience, the Yurei ability is not common, and it's very easy to miss. The Yurei is the only one that can take a fully open door and close it in one swing. I will show you what this looks like. I got one right here by there. Oh, it just closed the door. Did you just do that?
Nope.
You didn't just close that door?
We have a Yurei. Nope.
It's a Yurei. So if you think you might be dealing with one of these, hopefully you're actually near areas with a lot of doors. Try opening the doors near it and keep your eyes on them. That being said, waiting for the Yurei to do its ability can be a bit like watching paint dry. Luckily, there's another way that you can test for this ghost. The Yurei, when smudged or incensed, will be locked to its room for 60 seconds. To my understanding, and I will correct myself in the comments if I find this to be untrue, it can still event outside of its room. It can still operate the breaker, but after that, it will return to its room. So if either an event or the breaker gets flipped in those 60 seconds, Yurei is still in play. So how do you test if it's in a locked room? Set up a motion sensor just outside of its room. If you're in a really large room, this can get very tricky. I advise setting the motion sensor somewhat lower to the ground just in case the ghost decides to crawl, by the way. Smudge the ghost when it hunts, then observe the motion sensor. While you're doing this test, also try to listen to the rest of the house. If you hear something being thrown in another room before the 60 seconds is up, or you see the motion sensor light up before the 60 seconds, it is not a Yurei. If your experience is like mine, I 100% understand if you find this ghost to be frustrating. I am glad to report, though, that with practice, I am starting to get a better handle on this one, and you will too. Let's talk about the Mare. Specifically about the Mare's special ability. I know I said early on, try to only take a couple of things at a time away from this video if it seems like you're overwhelmed. I might suggesting taking this thing as one of them. If you see it, it can take what is otherwise a problematic ghost and turn it into easy money. The Mare is the only ghost that has an ability to immediately turn off a light when you turn it on. Do not confuse this if you turn a light on and then the ghost starts to event right next to you. That is not the Mare ability. You have to be outside of a hunt or an event, but if you turn on a light and the ghost immediately shuts it off, you have a Mare. Play with this light switch some more.
Hello. You like doors. You really like doors.
Good lord. There it is. There it is. There it is. Got it. Mare ability. There it is. It's a Mare. A couple other things to keep in mind with the Mare. The Mare will not turn on lights. It can turn on the breaker, but it will not turn on lights. So if you're doing testing for something else and the ghost turns on a light, you can safely cross off Mare. Another bit about the Mare is that it does not like hunting from areas where lights are on. Please note that I did not say that it won't hunt from lighted areas. So just because you might see it originate a hunt from a lit area, that doesn't mean that you can rule it out, but you can use this information to try a couple of things if you're on the fence. For example, you could try leaving the lights on in the Mare's room and see if it's inclined to change its favorite room. While the ghost's room is well lit, you can try shutting off lights in a nearby room and see if it doesn't prefer to hunt from there instead. And one more thing to keep in mind, Mares are more likely to do light-breaking ghost events. I cannot emphasize enough, do not use this information to lock in your guess. Use it as perhaps encouragement to further test all ghosts can break lights. I've absolutely had other ghosts sometimes break multiple lights in a single session. So be aware of this, but don't get tunnel visioned. Next is the Goryo. The Goryo can be a little tough to detect as there's not really any official test that you can do to 100% verify it. The Goryo loves its favorite room. It will not change its favorite room ever. It will wander out of its favorite room the least of any of the ghosts. And note that I said the least and not never. Also keep in mind that this doesn't mean that it won't event on a player far from its ghost room, and then like any other ghost, there's always the possibility that it might hunt immediately after an event. That's not teleporting like a Banshee or a Wraith, that's just event hunt. If you suspect that you might be dealing with a Goryo and you want to test for it, observe where the hunts are beginning. If they consistently come out of its ghost room, if you don't really hear it doing anything anywhere else in the house very often, if you have gone through test after test and you've ruled everything else out, there's a really good chance it's a Goryo. This is often a ghost that's arrived upon by process of elimination rather than actual testing. Thank you so much for watching. This was a lot of work, but hopefully it got you closer to playing Phasmophobia in a way that I find really fun. We occasionally play this over at my Twitch, by the way. Feel free to drop by and say hello. The link to that is down below in the description. Also, here on YouTube, I like to upload videos that show me playing on this difficulty and working through all the tests that I just outlined. So if you want reinforcement and practice, that's a good playlist to find it. Thank you so much. Happy hunting. And if you'd like to drop me a like or a subscription, I'd really appreciate it. If you have any constructive feedback, please feel free to leave it in the comments below. Thank you.